I believe most people on here know me, but just in case you don't, my name is Deidre Newby. I'm the Executive Director for Newford Ministries. You might be familiar with my dealings with different aspects of our ministries, particularly on the profit side of our business. But today I'm here in front of the camera for a completely different situation. One of the ways that God often deals with me as far as our ministries is concerned is through dreams and visions. I have so many of them, I really cannot keep track of the number of dreams and visions, because typically, and I meant to bring my book in here, we keep an archive of all the different dreams and visions, particularly that God has provided me. Typically, I don't share my dreams often by video blog. In the past, when I first started having a great deal of dreams and visions, I would blog them on a previous blog page that I used to have. And over the past 3 to 4 years, I have just been logging them in our archive. And then my team and I will get together, pray over them, and oftentimes God would give us interpretations concerning them, and sometimes He doesn't. And it has been over the past, I don't know, 2 years, maybe a little longer, maybe a little less, that my dreams have gotten to a point where I'm having dreams about specific people. But this dream that I had last night was really unusual. There are times when I have some really weird, what I consider weird and unusual dreams. But for me, this probably takes the cake, probably because of the individual that was the lead person or the main person in the dream, which will happen to be George Soros. And if you're not familiar with George Soros is, I strongly recommend you go look him up, because he will have a major impact in some way or shape or form of what we see going on in our society today, and that would directly probably at one day impact the church. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my dream, because that's what I feel led in my spirit to do. I'm going to name all the players that are mentioned in this dream. What you choose to do with it, with the names and the church that I share in this dream, is on you. The dream was very lengthy, so I don't want to leave any key details out. I'm not going to read it directly from my paper, but I'm going to skim read through the different sections that I have written here. So if you see me looking down, it's because I'm trying to reflect on the notes. And if God gives you an interpretation in regards to the dream, or something that, because we all know in part, please do not hesitate to share your comments in the comment section, or hit us up with an email at info@Newford Ministries. That's NEWFORD Ministries plural .org. All right, I had a weird kind of dream. I had a weird dream last night. And the dream that I had last night involved George Soros. But in this dream, there were 5 different scenes going on simultaneously. And so I'm going to kind of break down each scene and what was taking place in each scene. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to provide an audio recording of Felicia Crawford, who is a prophet in our, or prophetess if you want to call it that, in our ministry, and she breaks down the meaning of this dream. Because when I woke up and had the dream, I thought it was the weirdest, craziest dream that I've had. It didn't make any sense to me, but when I shared it to her, she indicated that it made a lot of sense to her. And after I listened to her interpretation, it did. It provided a lot of clarity. And as you listen to this, because we all know in part, And if God puts anything in your spirit, please feel free to share your comments about what God may be speaking to you in regards to dream in the comment section, or email us at info@newfortministries.com. All right, so I'm going to be looking down every now and then at my paper because it was a lot of details and pretty lengthy dream. Even though I'm going to be leaving some stuff out, but I'm going to try to make sure I include all the essential parts. And then we'll just go from there. All right, so in the first scene of the dream, I saw George Soros. If you've ever been to a concert, you know there's a backstage. And typically on the backstage, there are sides to the backstage where a person can stand and get almost a good 360 view of everything that's going on around the stage, including the stage. And so George Soros, where I'm sitting, was standing on this backstage, and he was just watching all the different things that was taking place around him. Okay, and what was the weird part about this dream was I was in the dream, and I was actually George Soros. But if you're looking at me in the dream, you could physically see the face and the body of George Soros, but I was him, if that makes sense. All right, so George Soros is standing there on the backstage, and me being him, I can feel this man's spirit, the way he thinks, and his attitude. So here, George Soros, as he's standing on this side backstage, he's at this mega church, and the mega church that he's at is Elevation Church. At some point in the dream, he's just watching the audience respond to the performance that is going on the stage. And you could tell he's taking pleasure out of the response he's seeing from the audience based on the entertainment that's being provided. Okay? And then at some point, George would look up, and when he looked up, at the very top of this church was like a skybox. And inside the skybox was Senior Pastor Steven Furtick. And during the whole entire dream, this man did not move. He stood there stiff with his arm crossed like this. And periodically, he spent most of the time watching the audience. And he'll look down and observe what the audience were doing, how they were responding to the entertainment. And periodically, he would look over to those who were performing. But his focus really was on the audience. And it's almost like as if he didn't even know George was there, because he never looked in the direction where George was standing. And inside of the box itself, the skybox itself was kind of dark, dreary. It was not well lit, but it was enough light to where you can see Steven Furtick and the entourage that he had with him. And the entourage he had with him, they were constantly busy. They were just running, doing different things. I couldn't make out what exactly they were doing, but they never stopped moving around him. They were just making different circles around him, and he just sat standing in that same pose, that same position, and the only thing that moved on him was his head looking to the audience, then to the performance, and back to the audience. Now, what was weird about Steven Furtick in this dream was those who were familiar with him and his ministry and his church know he's a white man, about 5'8", 5.5 feet tall. And like I said, he's a white man. But in the dream, he was a black man, a young black man, who had I couldn't see his facial features other than the color of his skin. But he had a high top fade, like the rap group duo Kid and Play. You know, Kid had that real high hair. And in his hair was this long red streak. And I just knew in the dream it was Steven Furtick, although he was of a different nationality, because he just had that. He gave off the spirit and the energy of Steven Furtick. Plus, it was his church, his congregation. All right, so he's just, like I said, he was just standing there with his arm crossed doing nothing. And George, when he was on the backstage, on the side, and the angle position he had, he spent most of his time watching Steven Furtick, although he paid a bit of attention to the other things that was going on, but his focus, for whatever reason, was tightly on Steven Furtick. Even though Steven Furtick wasn't doing anything, his eyes very rarely moved from that position. Until later on in the dream, that is. So now in the next section, if you look just a row down from the skybox off to the right, there was another room about the same size. But this room was well lit. You can see any and everything and everybody that was in that room and what exactly they were doing from where George was standing. But George never during that part of the dream, never looked towards that room. And at the time when George was standing downstairs on the side stage, backstage, there was a young man in there sitting at a desk on the telephone talking the whole entire time. And this room here was called a soft count room. And if you don't know what a soft count room is, it's a room that usually a professional counters were used with a long table in the room, and that's where they used to count currency, count money. This room was shaped a little different, but that was the purpose. I could tell in the dream that was the purpose of the room. And then off to the right of this room, where the window panel was, because there was a window panel, there was like a little rectangular cutout that was either a window or a door. Okay? All right, so then moving to the next part of the dream, there was live performance going on the stage. And at some point, George got distracted by what was going on the stage. So he turned his attention from Steven Furtick to the entertainment that was taking place. And the entertainment that started taking place on the stage were hip-hop rappers. And there were 4 famous rappers that came on stage. 3 of them I really didn't recognize, or I just couldn't make out their faces in the dream. And one, you hear her name and almost everybody know who she is. So the first 2 performers performed was a male and a female. And George would look at the entertainment and then he would look at the audience. He would look at the entertainment and he would look at the audience. And you could tell by the way he was looking, he appeared to be pleased with the entertainment based on the audience response. All right, and the audience was kind of rowdy, but nothing extreme. And then they went off the stage, and then on comes Queen Latifah and another famous male rapper. But again, I could not make out his face or tell you who he was, but I knew he was well known. And when she came out on stage, the church audience went crazy and screaming off the top of their lungs. And so she begins to perform. And even though the audience were louder and enjoying her performance more than the first 2, George appeared to be very displeased for some reason. You could tell it on his face. And he wasn't no longer looking at the audience. He was just focusing on what was going on the stage. And one of the activities that was going on the stage, Queen Latifah had all these bunch of middle-aged girls, halfly dressed, and they were dancing very sexually provocative. And the audience was just eating it up, so to speak. They were applauding and cheering and carrying on. But George seemed to not take a liking to it for one reason or other. And then at some point in the dream, my focus became on this ring that was on his index finger. And the ring was kind of this long, and it wrapped around his finger. And as it wrapped around his finger, the only part that was on the back part is where it attached here to keep the ring on his finger. And he pulls the ring off, and then he just throws it. And when he throws it, instead of it just landing on the stage, it ended up flying through that little opening that was in the soft count room. And then that was the first time I saw George in a dream look towards this, whatever this was standing next to him, and he looked at him like this. And so he kind of almost stuck his hand in his pocket and just slowly and calmly walk across the stage. And by this time, I'm watching the audience react, because I'm like in two places one time. I'm George in the dream, but I'm watching from a high place of what's taking place at the same time. And so from this high place, and so as he's walking across the stage, the audience look like they don't even notice he's slowly just scrolling across the stage, and the Queen Latifah and her performers don't even notice or choose not to notice him walking across the stage. And so then once he gets on the other side of the stage, he where there should have been more chairs in the auditorium or the church, he just disappeared into darkness, because that side of the church was very dark. And when he reappears, that little rectangular opening that I mentioned that was in the window pane or the pane of the soft count room, he appeared through that as if he just walked through a wall or something. So you have this one guy in there, he's on the phone, and when he looks up and he sees George into the room, you could feel fear overtook that room. And so the guy, you could tell he was trying hard not to now get off the phone so he could need to address George. And so George stood there and he waited, and then you could tell he was getting irritated, like he had this mentality when he walks into a place, everything should stop and shut down in order to address whatever it is that he needs. And so he eventually turns his attention to this wall on the right. And on the wall, I don't know if you can see this picture frame right here behind me, or this dry board that's behind me. There are picture frames that size on the wall, and they were in these glass casing. There were about 4 or 5 of them. And inside of the glass casing was these gold-looking like nuggets about this size. And there were about, I don't know, 10, 20 or more in each case. So they were like several in a row. Yeah, that's another row, and this is another row, but I don't know how many was in there. And on each nugget, there was this little sticker with a price tag value on it. And George was looking at it, and you could tell he was admiring the gold nuggets that was on inside these picture frames. So at some point, another guy comes in, and he immediately noticed George, and he glances at the guy that's on the telephone like, why haven't you addressed him yet? And then all of a sudden, he just, fear overcame him, and he just went in this panic, and he was just running back and forth in the room like he's lost it. And George never acknowledged him at all. Then at some point, this guy who couldn't have been no more than, I don't know, 4 feet tall, he walks into the room, and he has a very boyish face. Looks like he's no older than 10, but he's a grown man. And he notices George, kind of looks at him and smiles. He walks around this glass casing, because there are glass casings all over this room, all the way around the guy who has the telephone, and he's looking at him like, why haven't you dressed the guy as well? And then he goes to this his desk, and he puts down this metal casing, and then he walks back around the glass case and comes to where George is and asks him, how can I help you? And by this time, George becomes infuriated. He's burning with anger, because he can tell by the way this guy addressed him, he don't know who he is. And so he asks the guy, you don't know who I am? And the guy kind of, like, am I supposed to know who you are? Kind of look on his face. And so then George proceeded to say to him, I threw my golden ruby ring in here, and I'm looking for it. Although in the dream, George never put forth an effort to look for it. And then he noticed finally at the corner of his eyes, near the desk area, the guy wouldn't put his briefcase down at, there's the ring. He says, in fact, there's the ring over there. And so the guy looks at George. He walks around the glass casing and goes to the area where the ring is. He picks it up, examines it, and then he walks back around to where George is. But he doesn't come back with the ring. And he just says to George That's a very beautiful ring. I could tell it's a very expensive ring. It has a bunch of rubies, gold rubies on it. But unfortunately, I cannot give the ring to you because I have no way of proving that the ring belongs to you. And when he says that, the guy on the phone, he jumps up, immediately slams the phone down, ran to the area where the ring was, come running around to where George is and apologized to George, hands him the ring and says that he apologized because his coworker does not know his coworker did not know who George is. And so then the George looks at the guy with this very intense look and says, "You don't know who I am? This ring here, which belongs to me, is worth more value than everybody who works here, the audience, and those performers on the stage salaries combined." And then I woke up and I had no idea what this crazy dream meant. And so when I shared it with my team, particularly with Felicia, and who's a prophet for our ministry, and she heard the dream, she immediately covered her head and said, "No, that dream makes absolute sense to me." And then this is what she proceeded to say in interpreting that dream.
You had George Soros, you had Queen Latifah, you had other rappers, performers, and you had Steven Furtick, but he didn't look like Steven Furtick. He was a black man with a high top and a long red streak through it. And in the church was Elevation Church. That environment represent what the church has become, a place of entertainment. Hence, Queen Latifah and the other artists on stage entertaining the people, and the people are into it. They're into it. They're craving the experience without an encounter. George Soros behind the stage, looking on, has infiltrated the church. He's the spirit that has infiltrated the church, and to control and manipulate the church to do his bidding or his agenda. And Steven Furtick represent the many leaders who have compromised and who have bowed down to this system because they took a price. Hence the pictures on the wall with the price tags and then with different goals and stuff. The price tag of the men and women who basically sold themselves for an agenda that is not a God, only for their own fame and their own empire and their own glory. Um, you were able to be Soros to feel the pride and the power of this man, and also to see how people fear him in such a way, those who knew who he was. But it's very interesting because there was a man that's in the dream who worked behind the scenes and yet did not know who George Soros was. And in that, he got a introduction, so to speak, of who this man was. And I believe that God is just allowing you to see how he pulls the strings, and Black Lives Matters, and he's behind a lot of the chaos and the confusion that's going on. That what a lot of people say about what's going on in the United States, because there's an agenda he wishes to fulfill. But this agenda is not for the benefit of people. It is an agenda to benefit the agenda of darkness, the one world order, to have people to bow down to this God of this world. The Bible calls him the great dragon, the old serpent, Satan, the devil. And this satanic rule which Revelation tells us will come to pass, but only for a short time. He will only reign a short time. And so he has his puppets in every sphere of societies, his puppets in every sphere of society for which he can manipulate and control and deceive the masses and get them hypnotized. He uses these puppets, hence Queen Latifah and the other rappers, hence people like Steven Furtick, to lull the people into a false sense as regarding the house of God worship, a false sense of unity, a false sense that people really care about you, when this man does not care who you are. You are just a pawn in his agenda. So the dream is basically letting you know what's really going on behind the scenes. Don't look at what it looks like on the outside, but see the players that are involved in this matter. Because soon the Lord of all will crush it all, and it will come to nothing.